Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We now have plenty of time for questions, so who'd like to start? Yes.
Just on the question of shipping, isn't consolidation of shipping lines also an issue in terms of how many, in terms of who is actually producing the data and who is actually available to subscribe to the data?
Yes, fantastic. Yes, I mean, it's basically a subscription service now from a few shipping lines. What used to just be a freely accessible radio signal that we used to study maritime traffic is now a subscription thing that you can pay thousands of euros per year to access from just a few monopolies, really. And all of these data sets have this sort of monopoly problem.
Signals depending off their AIS when they're going through the Red Sea in order not to be attacked.
Yeah.
That's the biggest shadow fleets.
Yes.
Then when we can kind of the sort of like that kind of data privatization or like I don't know.
So could you speak up?
Oh, sorry. Is there any way that we can any way for like that goes against or like kind of reverse the movement of like data privatization? Because I do strongly agree that open data is very important for like any kind of research and so on.
So for people online, it's about any way to reverse the trends. Maybe you could all speak to that from your particular perspectives.
Well, I think it requires much more substantial overhaul than we've been looking at. There are, for example, quasi-open systems being proposed that I think don't go far enough. So Elsevier, for example, or Springer, they would like to sort of create these Spotify-like systems for data where you subscribe, but it's somehow governments who subscribe, so you, the university, don't have to pay as much. And I think in a sense they have openness in mind, but they don't have the economy in mind the way we do. We produce knowledge, without having the aim to sell it. Their aim is to sell it. So it is a different economy. And in my view, I think there are initiatives out there that are open. Everything from proposing new journals, new refereeing practices. Openness has a lot of different means of production. But I guess in this talk, my view is that we should really focus on creating open data sets. As we create data sets, as scientists, social scientists, people studying things, making that data open is crucial, and creating resources for us for that data to be shared in an open way. Perhaps we're not focusing on enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about these data sets in particular, but data does cost to collect, so there are costs associated with collecting this data and making it available. So I think that's a question that we need to consider in all of this, just essentially looking at it as free. But the other thing that's crossing my mind around this question, this issue, is the big move towards the kind of research security agenda that now there's increasingly there's open research is being held in tension with the trusted research agenda, as it's called in the UK, where we're kind of recognising that not all of our potential partners might be acting in good faith, but not all of our researchers might want to make openly available, not all of our data might want to make openly available to everybody. So we have to be a bit cautious about what we're sharing, who we're working with. So there's a huge kind of due diligence for movement in institutions around research now. Every research office will have a trusted research team looking at these kind of issues of research security. So I think we've got to move from these halcyon days where we've all kind of held hands and sung the open research anthem to kind of thinking actually that there might be bad actors out there. Obviously, with increasing geopolitical tensions, we have to just be a little bit more mindful of that and more careful about that. So that's not going to help with this issue, I don't think, around making data completely openly available. We just have to be a little bit more cautious about what and to whom.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I have two things to say about that. The first one is diversifying what we value as outputs. And this is like something that Liz has been really working on in her role. as head of impact, and for university, for example, to produce data sets. At this point here, it's valued, but it's not as valued as producing outputs, as published articles. And what you see is that there are so many layers under that. Why data, primary data, is not valued? Who is producing in academia today? Primary data is mostly qualitative researchers. Who is holding the capacity to define what is the best output and the most valuable output? Might not be qualitative researcher. It might be people who are capable of producing a lot of published academic articles because they don't collect data themselves. So you see, like, there is a political sociology of which type of output is valuable. And if people who actually produce primary data and know the cost of primary data have a better capacity to make this type of work valued, maybe the university will invest in data set as valuable output and not just in the output of those data sets, etc. The other thing is changing how you change norms collectively, and this about what is valuable. And we haven't talked yet about DORA, and I'm not an expert about DORA, so maybe someone in the audience is better equipped. But this global initiative to try to change the way research is, to change the criteria of research evaluation. And it has different dimensions. One is design, and including design of indicators. Another one is behavior. Another one maybe is policy. But the behavioral aspect is how do we socialize and re-socialize ourselves to value different things? And how do we make that happen? Through so many dimensions, research evaluation, the way we talk to PhD students, etc., etc. And this is not impossible task. A lot of professions change their criteria of what is valued, and from sociology vocabulary is accumulation of symbolic capital, and how do we enable people to not feel that they have completely lost the symbolic capital they have accumulated with certain output because the output are changing, etc., etc. But this is more generational type of work. It's like, can the next generation value different things that we are currently valuing? It's a long-term type of objective.
Just touching on the point of what we value, I was also thinking a bit about, the issue that we're facing with a lot of academic environments is that, career progression, academic reputation is based around, the number of publications in high impact factor journals. And because of how, time crunched academics are, they're often just sort of chasing that as the metric because that's what's going to help them progress in their career. So some of the things you mentioned, like how they produce data or their contributions data, but then also other things which I know we've been focusing on at LSE, like impact, because I think for me, research is valuable or worthwhile if it's making a change in the world. But at the moment, our kind of, metrics of how we measure academics institutionally, across the country, across the world, aren't representing that diversity and are very narrow. So I guess what can we do as an institution to change how we measure performance, and how can we encourage, other universities and other networks of institutions to do the same?
Yes, I'll respond to that one because obviously the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment actually builds on DORA. DORA was very much involved in the kind of development of the coalition. And I suppose in some senses it's an extension of DORA. And I would say that that view is very much being challenged globally. So the Global Research Council, which is a global group of research funders, have now developed some dimensions for responsible research assessment. So they're all agreeing that actually we need to assess research differently, we need to value different things. The coalition itself has got about 850 signatories in 3 years. So, and these are research performing institutions, research funding institutions, learning societies, and there's a strong movement towards broadening the diversity of things that we value. So that's the first principle of QARA, broadening out the sorts of research contributions that we actually assess. And of course, increasingly there are measures being introduced to do that. So we're now seeing narrative CVs are common, obviously in the UK for Research Council funding. across Europe, so the European Research Council now use narrative CVs, and so that's going beyond how many publications we got, so list-based kind of CVs, to getting researchers to respond to kind of 4 broad questions around their contribution to knowledge, contribution to society, contribution to their communities, and contribution to others, to other researchers. So in one sense, they're the more difficult for researchers to fill in, because you've got to think in a qualitative kind of narrative way. They're more difficult to assess in some ways, and we need to think about how we evidence those things. So this is early doors really for some of these initiatives. Something else we're seeing in Europe is something called career assessment matrices. So Norway has a NorCam now, Poland has a PolCam, there's a FinCam, so across Europe we're seeing these. And a career assessment matrix is basically a template where a wide range of different qualities and contributions of researchers that are listed, and researchers are expected to kind of evidence their contributions across a much broader range of things. So there's a lot of work going on globally to try and address this. Appreciate it, it is early days, and I guess because I live and breathe it, I can perhaps feel it's more advanced than it actually is, and it hasn't reached all corners. But I think there's really positive signs that change is coming, and it's important for all institutions to recognise that, because increasingly, if you want to get funding, you will need to be able to demonstrate a broader range of competence and skills if you want to get something. And we're already having people complaining that they are a victim of QARA, because whereas they felt that previously they would have definitely hands down got a research grant, now because a wider range of things are being assessed, and they're not kind of perhaps able to evidence on all those things, they're not getting that funding. So, so there's training and support for those people, but it's evidence, I think, that a broader diversity of people are winning under a kind of broader set of contributions that are being made.
Add anything to that?
Yeah, so just out of personal experience, I started working at LSE in 2016, and already I feel the context at LSE really changed. In the first years, what we were told, so I felt like going to an institution like LSE, I would be asked to publish a lot, and it was very strict that I shouldn't publish a lot. I should limit my time to a few top-ranked publications. And if you look, I'm publishing too much, that means I'm not doing my job. So first, this was a shift from what I believed LSE would be to what it actually was. And it doesn't mean that people will be impressed if I publish a lot in a lot of top-ranked journals, but very clear line. And at the beginning, there was not really a conversation about impact. And over the years, I really saw this changing. For example, with the role given to Liz, the fact that she has a team, it's very visible. They have funding to give to reward impact. If we look at criteria of evaluation, you cannot be promoted without traditional publication, but impact is always there. Like, it's something that you can showcase. And that means, for example, if your line manager is not into that, you can mobilize LSE discourse to say, I'm doing this because LSE wants me to do this. We might disagree, but I'm aligned with LSE. So you can use all this ecosystem. And it's just out of personal experience. Now I'm thinking, I'm tenured, so I mean, I have more security, but I'm thinking about writing a novel as an output. And I think maybe I would have done that despite this, if this context was not here, but maybe it would have been much more stressful because I would have had much more resistance. But now I feel it's quite easy for me if I encounter resistance in my department, or if people are joking that this is not serious. I'm like, I'm very serious. I'm committed to LSE, a diversification of impact. So I feel I'm provided with a discourse that enable me to move in directions that I would like to go. So I think LSE it's not that we are completely changing everything, but at LSE level, we are going in a reasonably positive direction.
No. Okay. Just agreement with all.
Agree. So there's a question there, and then you're at the front. So yeah.
Hi, yeah, this was very insightful, and I really like the example about biodiversity because my PhD is on accounting for biodiversity. And so I was just speaking to a data provider the other day, and basically, well, they had kind of the opposite view of yours, they're saying, oh, it's great, and now we can layer all these data sets, we can put them behind the paywall, we can layer them and provide very accurate information for our investors and asset managers, insurance, and all that. At the same time, when you talk to investors and they say, well, this is all useful, this is all very nice, but at the same time, this very granular and sometimes over precision that doesn't enable us to create some standardized measurement that we can use for our actual investment decision making. And so my question would be, is there a trade-off between the accuracy of the information and the demands for usability and the necessary reduction of complexity to actually use that information? Like, can an information be too useful? Can it be too much? And if there is this trade-off, how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, there's certainly another layer I didn't comment on a lot in that in the market for these sorts of data sets that is standards like sort of ESG standards that would be environmental sustainable governance. And carbon markets, this sort of thing. And there's always a layer of theory between the data set underpinning these sort of abstract things that must tell you here's how environmentally sustainable your governance practices are, and the underlying data that's telling you about something concrete like biodiversity or carbon levels in this particular region of the sea. And I think, you know, that's sort of at a level where we as the academy, I think, play a substantial role where we could wield influence a little bit more. Often those layers are filled in by us, you know, for the price of the paycheck of the university to us, and then feed into these absolutely essential markets that, you know, allow the price of the data to go up, allow, you know, these things to be shifted out gradually ever more away from universities when we want to use them for our purposes. So, I mean, I'm not really answering the question of what exactly is the interplay. I agree that there's a role, there is an intermediate layer where things like how useful is the data, you know, come into play because you're processing it into something that can be used. And my view is just we can play a role in that market dynamic, or we can think about how we play a role in that market dynamic coming from a university perspective. Even theoreticians can ask, you know, is this theory being used to drive a market in a certain way? Can there be new standards of openness, even for the theory that we use to process that data as it gets used to calculate ESG metrics and so on?
Thank you, everyone. It's been really interesting hearing the conversations today, because one of the things, I'm Amberley, sorry, I should have said, I'm an academic from another institution. I've come to visit you today, and I teach across both health sciences in one institution and visual arts in another institution. And they're both very opposite in terms of research method, but also in terms of, I think, what is valued. So this conversation that we've just touched on at the end about what do we value and what are we measuring now with open access research and what might change in the next couple of years. I think my question / thing that's on my mind at the moment is, how do we connect, how do all of you connect open access research as it stands now and what we're measuring with the groups of either academics and researchers, but also the people on the ground who are doing the work and doing the kind of participation type work on the ground, but aren't necessarily able to still publish, communicate, talk about their work in open access research spaces. So yes, open access is more accessible than traditional research, but still, how do we increase access of open access research to those who are actually doing the work on the ground and would, I think, contribute wonderfully to what it is that we're measuring, what it is that we value, but still don't have access, even in open access spaces.
Or did you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm not going to answer everything you want because it's hard. So I will choose and then let the other answer what they want. So at the moment, for example, a type of open access like the JISC transformative agreement that European institutions have, it's mainly open access for academics or teachers, because the type of writing expected requires certain type of skills, and the type of reading also requires certain type of skills. So then it's about, do we legitimize other type of outlets that are considered valuable knowledge, both are as things we read as academics and are things we publish in as academics that are organized differently or require a different type of skills that people who might not have traditional academic writing or maybe writing skill because people might have done an undergrad, etc. But it takes something different to publish in a top-ranked journal, academic journal. And then it's about there are different things. One thing is who is gonna spend the time into publishing into those things if they are not valued or if they are outside the skill set we have. So for example, LSE has a lot of blogs that are very successful, but every time we receive an invitation, can you turn that into a blog post? Personally, it takes me 2 full days to turn an article into a blog post. So here I legitimize a form of writing that is more accessible for both to read and to write for a broader audience, but it's at my own expense. LSE so far doesn't have a service that turns all on publications into accessible format, which will be useful for us individuals, but also will contribute to legitimizing spaces that might be more accessible for other audiences. So I think a lot of stuff that is happening also in the conversation that we haven't talked about is not only about the economic costs, but how much is put on the individual academics to legitimize alternative forms. And it might not be at a certain level of career cost or risk for the career, because at some point we can do whatever we want. We have already if we have established we can publish traditionally, that means it can even look like beneficial that we can do things completely outside the norm. But it's about how much time it takes for us to learn how to produce those outputs and to then do them alongside our normal work. And I think a lot of this conversation that I would like to contribute to personally, why I'm not doing that enough is because I have limited amount of hours in my week. And if I have to choose, I cut those.
Brian and Lizzie, anything more?
Well, I mean, I agree with this point. It reminds me of what Lizzie was saying earlier as well about how data is free. There's somebody who's doing it. And I take it that part of the way you're answering the question is to say that to get it to the ground, the people on the ground, there's this sort of labor involved. And there's a question about the costing of that labor. Yeah, it's sort of expected of academics automatically. But, ideally there would be some system in place that isn't simply private market driven. Because private market driven seems to be just increasing the cost of these things, and you're not going to be able to afford it as the people on the ground working in NHS or wherever. And so we're thinking about how we want to fund that data, or argue that it is being funded because, for example, we are driving the prices down of data more generally through our open practices. I mean, that's something that we don't often cost. When you win a grant, you say, I won this many pounds. But if you produce a lot of data that is freely open to people and is being used widely, that doesn't sort of go into the university's balance sheet as something they have to pay less for, but perhaps could be, I mean, that's something a person could try to measure. But I think it requires thinking in sort of really quite different ways.
I think it's a really good question. That to be truly open requires this translation level and translation layer. I can't say that. Too many L's. But it's two thoughts. Firstly, there might be a role for AI here, dare I say it, because we can't use AI for everything. But it is very good, and I've asked it to write blog posts in the style of Lizzie Gand, and it does quite a good job actually. So if you publish enough and you're out there enough, it can just do some of that work for you that you can then kind of check it, and so it can take some of the labour out of it. But one of the things that I more generally think about this kind of, we often talk about having to incentivise our academic colleagues to engage with open research. How can we incentivise Audrey to write a blog post or a journal article? But if we think it's that important for us as a university to do that work, put a service layer in. We've got research managers, we've got translation scientists, we've got people who have those skills to do those things. Let's not talk about incentivising academics who are already over busy doing more of this stuff, she says, stopping herself from swearing, and put in professionals who can do that job, do that really well, and just take that work away from our academic colleagues if it doesn't need to be done by them, is what I would say.
I guess if I can respond.
Quickly, and then we'll have the final question. Yeah.
I guess just hearing the responses and continuing to process it, it feels like, yes, there's a service level that could be a solution, but there's also a collaboration level that could work. Again, the only reason why I mentioned teaching across 2 different disciplines is because when you work in visual arts, the pedagogical approach is about participation and it's about translation and accessibility, whereas in health sciences, it's about rigor and it's about all the things that we're talking about today. And I think that considering that 75% of our outputs are collaborative anyway, I wonder if there's different approaches to how we collaborate and matching disciplines that write with rigor and create in other ways, and that becomes a collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the topic there, because it's such an important part of the sort of impact and engagement ecosystem. To think about open access is really important, but how do you know if someone, it doesn't mean that then people are going to actually find it, and if they find it they can understand it, and if they understand it, can they act upon it? And so I often try to get people to think about, and I speak for myself who worked in a very soggy bit of social psychology, studying people talking to each other, a space which is, you know, pretty much owned by psychology and popular psychology, and so my papers are very important. They're my anchors to like my integrity, but they're deeply under the sea and no one will ever find them unless I do something, not just making them open access, but I feel like I need to send, you know, a speedboat to those people, and you know, maybe a canoe over there, because not I want people to find them. But my anchors are quite important because people say a lot of nonsense about talking, and so those anchors are important, but to have that sense of like, okay, my anchor's there, but now I need to build some different ships and vessels to go to other audiences. Final question.
Sorry, it's not really a question, but I was just getting very fired up because I'm a research communications manager. So my job is to be that translator, I suppose, from the academic to society. But I think the issue is like so much of it is also about the research design and like putting in budgets. So any academics in the room, put in budgets for communications and engagement, and also making sure that in your research design it's circular in a sense. So you go back to your research participants. Academic Adelina Comasura, who I used to work with, she came up with really interesting research design where they would go back for second and third interviews with the same participants to validate and show participants what they were writing about what the participants had said, to kind of, again, like co-create. So I think like any moves towards that are very important and valuable.
Thank you. Quick final comment from Audrey.
But most research produced at LSE is not produced via grants. So there is no, like, the budgeting is at the service level.
Yeah. Thank you so much to our panel and to you in the room for such an interesting discussion. Before we formally close and thank our speakers, I just want to first of all point you in the direction of lunch. If you can't stay to eat, do take stuff away with you, but also feel free to stay and hang out with us until the last person goes. And just to remind people that the next event on from the Open Research Working Group will be on open access and the commons, on the many faces of scholar-led publishing, which will be the 27th of January. But before we all go, can we thank you so much for such a fantastic panel, fantastic discussion, fantastic questions, fantastic answers. I'm sure we've solved it all. Nothing left to do, except give a round of applause.